He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 27 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back for another episode, Henry. Today, we have a guest who is a friend of mine from LinkedIn connections. He's in Phoenix, Arizona. His name is TJ Bennett. He's a freelance copywriter and creative director and owner of his own little virtual creative machine called the Pudding Factory. And he also does a little coaching on the side. Let's join the conversation. Okay. All right, Henry, we're back, and I'm really excited to have a friend and a colleague from Phoenix, Arizona. His name is TJ Bennett. He is a freelance writer, creative director, and his company is called the Pudding Factory. He does a lot of work with ad agencies, as well as his own clients. And he's got a kind of side gig where he's become a coach. He's using all his energy and his experience after decades in the business.
Yes.
To start helping others who are aspiring to the same career. So TJ, Henry and I are delighted to have you on the Brief Brothers. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm excited to be here. I been following you guys for a while, watched some of the episodes, and yeah, I think like most of the folks who've probably been on here, I'm a bit of a brief nut. I recognize the value of the brief and the frustration that comes when they're not well done, and the energy that comes when they are well done, and how much of a springboard that can be for doing something really great without having to spin your wheels.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, TJ? I mean, you've been in the business, you worked in the agency world, now you're a freelancer. Yeah. Where did you start? How did you get started?
And what got you into this crazy business?
Yeah, exactly. And was there a moment you said, I've got to learn more about creative briefs, and when was that?
Yeah, so I've been doing this for just about 27 years now.
Good number.
It's funny, I actually got interested in this business. My cousin, who's about a year older than me, is also a copywriter and has been a creative director and still doing it. And he showed up at Easter dinner one year with his book, old school book, like physical copies of ads, his portfolio. And he just, he was showing it to all of us and talking about what he did. And I remember just kind of being like, first, just like, wow, that seems cool. And then second, like, wait, that's a job. I had already gone through college, and I went to a school where this was not part of the program. I went to business school. It was just, I was going to go be a businessman, whatever the heck that meant. And I was about a year out of school at this point, and kind of like floundering, looking for something that really interested me. And I started just asking him, like, what is this thing? Like, what does it mean to be a writer? What do you do? And it's like, well, I come up with ideas all day, and then I write the ideas and help develop them, and it helps sell stuff, and they pay me money. I was like, well, that sounds pretty cool. Especially he had some pretty good work actually already at that stage of his career. And so I just started picking his brain, like, how do I do this? And he said, just start trying to put your book together, and then just start trying to talk to people. And, it took a while. I would say it was another year and a half before I even sort of poked my head in the door at a place. I was working on my book and trying to get meetings and all that stuff. And I got good enough that I finally got a job at a place. At this point, I was living in California. I started, in the New York area. I grew up in New Jersey, and, got a job at a small agency, and just kind of, made my way through.
It kind of feels like, and I landed in this business by accident, but if you're young like you are, trying to break in, knowing that you want to break in as a creative, it feels like kind of like a comic doing, like, you got to work up the nerve to get to that first open mic, like, building a book like that without having, any experience or really, like you said, you hadn't contemplated it up until that point. I would imagine if it's like that first open mic night that, a guy walks up to and bombs, but somehow told one joke that was good, and that gave him the courage to go back on a second night.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly how it happened. I mean, I there was a while where I was putting stuff together and I'd be like, I think that's interesting. And then, you know, I'd go back and look at, at that time again, kind of mostly physical books, and I'm looking through copies of stuff and I'm like, well, it's not bad. But then I finally, got a meeting with somebody, I think it was at FCB in California. And I didn't have much, but I had a few things. And he thought, well, something here. I was sort of trying to art direct my ideas, which was probably not the smart thing to do as a writer.
But copywriters do it all the time.
We do. He was gracious enough to sort of overlook some of the weakness in that area. He's like, there's some interesting thinking here, but it needs some refinement. But like, we could bring you in as just kind of a junior, and it was just freelancing at that point. And I did that for a bit, and then I landed a full-time gig somewhere else, like I said, and kind of bit by bit, you just start learning on the fly. And I think as part of that process, you do start to observe the briefing process too. And I think it really wasn't until probably a few years later, I was back in New York and working in New York, that I really started to appreciate just how important these briefs were. I think at first you're just sort of overwhelmed. It's like, and kind of just so giddy to be doing
And
this.
you just kind of, I would imagine, take it for granted. Like, oh, here
Yeah.
comes the person with a brief, and you don't
Yeah.
really contemplate who this person is, what they do, how much work they put into it. It's like, oh, this is a step that I have
Yeah.
to take. I have to hear this person before I could start playing in the sandbox.
Exactly, right. And I just don't think as a result you fully grasp the importance of it at that point, until I think you start to get a little more confident in your own abilities, and you start to discern that sometimes this piece of paper that shows up on your desk is a little more helpful than other times. And that's a lot of guidance too from the creative directors that I worked from, right? Like, they would start to make comments like, oh, this brief, it's not great. So here's some additional thoughts that might help you. And other ones,
How about,
Go
I have
ahead.
a question regarding that. So the paper's one thing. How about the person behind the paper? The variation there, like, do you find like some strategists just kind of got it or wanted to hang out more with the creatives? And
Yeah.
because I've found, it's not that difficult if you think about it, but I think the best strategists are going to be the ones that aren't afraid to hang out with the creatives and
Mhm.
really understand what their motivations are and try to be an aid to them rather than trying to be another creative.
Yeah, again, I think I picked up on that the more I was working in New York and starting to see the distinctions between some of the strategists who were showing up. Some it was a little more just kind of like, here it is, let me know if you have questions. And then there were some who definitely they brought a certain energy. First of all, you could tell they were excited about the insight or insights that were behind the brief. And there was more of that willingness to be a bit of a partner. I think, kind of like you said, there are some who maybe went the full, like, I'm a creative with you. But I think people who struck that balance of like, I'm another partner with you in this, and I want not only to help you succeed, but I'm excited about the creative output that's going to come from this, just like you are. So there is that sense of understanding what motivated us and the work needing to be great. They were just as excited about it. And when they saw work that really kind of came out of that insight and brought it to life in interesting ways, I felt that they were there with us, kind of like getting some of those goosebumps and getting excited about it the same way we would when that insight comes to us and we finally have the idea we're proud enough of to present to our boss at that point.
Do you recall, TJ, when you felt confident enough to start questioning a brief or start getting involved in engaging with the strategist to talk about a brief?
Yeah, I would say, I worked at Wonderman and Y&R, kind of crossing between the two back in the day in New York. We worked primarily on the AT&T account. And I think somewhere along the way there, like, I started to get a sense that my art director partner and I, we just started to get a sense that we were gaining some traction. We were gaining some respect. We produced a few things, and it suddenly starts to feel like you have a voice, right? I think when you're new at a place or relatively early in your career, you try to maybe keep your voice quiet. You don't think you have a strong enough opinion. And once you start to have that voice, it's like, you'd speak up during briefings and go, well, I don't know if I understand this, or this single-minded statement here feels a bit muddy, feels a bit confusing, feels a bit not single-minded, feels doubly, triply minded.
Nah, that never happens.
No, never, never.
And so, yeah, oh my gosh. I mean, that's, I think the,
And
Yeah.
one sentence, it's
Right. And then they get sneaky and they take the ands out and figure you won't notice.
right,
semicolon,
yeah,
right,
comma, whatever.
ellipses, maybe, yeah.
So I hijacked, tell us a little more about your trajectory. So then you end up in
Yeah.
New York, you're working
Yeah.
at Wonderman
Yeah.
and YNR.
Mhm.
And so I'm always interested, just setting aside everything about the briefs, like career trajectory
Yeah.
and where you went and what you did after that.
Yeah, I kind of had a good run in New York. Worked at Wonderman Y&R for a few years, probably almost 5. And
That's a
then
long time for creative.
it is. It's probably, I think it's the longest tenure I had at any job.
Were they already sister agencies at WPP at that time? So you were like,
They were. God, I'm trying to remember where. I think it had maybe just happened, the WPP thing at that point. Actually, when I first joined Wonderman, they were called Empiric, which I don't know if either of you remember that, but they
Yeah,
went through
I
this
do.
like year and a half where they were trying to embrace the technology
Mhm.
craze then. So they spent about a year with this new weird name that nobody ever understood what it meant. It almost sounded kind of ominous. And eventually, like after about a year, the president of the agency goes, "Yeah, we're going back to Wonderman." Lester was still
Yeah,
around.
it sounds like a
We're like,
research firm.
yeah, it really did. I think they were sort of trying to be sort of this consultant kind of thing. And it was like, everybody was trying different stuff at that stage
yeah,
to sort of embrace.
Lester Wonderman only died like in 2018 or 2019.
Yeah, so
Lived
he,
until it just was like it was resonating with me, the YNR and Wonderman thing, because the agency I'm at, Zuby, is a WPP agency, and as of
Mhm.
January of last year, we were folded into the VML YNR network. And
Yes.
I also work on a couple of joint pieces of business with Wonderman Thompson, which is the
Mhm.
merged J.
Yeah.
Walter Thompson and Wonderman. So
Mhm.
that's my backyard right now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've freelanced at Wonderman, at YNR, and at J. Walter, and
Mhm.
some of the clients that I freelanced on were started off at one agency and moved to another, and I just went with it as a
Yeah.
freelancer. So yeah, if you've had a chance to touch a lot of business that lands in some of these major shops that get merged and sucked into something else, that's just kind of the way the game goes.
Yeah, it's been kind of fascinating to see all the different mashups that have happened over the last couple of decades. Yeah, I went from there. I went to Draft, which was at that point becoming Draft FCB. So another little mashup. I spent a little time
Still
there.
in New York or in Chicago?
Well, in New York, yeah, this was they had opened the New York office a few years before that, I think, and then we're growing and then we're merging with FCB. And then from there, I went to Chiat, which I ended up doing 2 stints at Chiat. This is my first one, working primarily on Sprint and Nextel.
In California or again in New York?
In New York, yeah, I spent about 12 years working at agencies in the city, and this is kind of in the mid part of that run, 2006, 7. Sprint Nextel was really fun. They had a pretty cool voice as a brand. There was
My
definitely,
wife worked on that.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was
we're both
hectic.
in the business. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. It was
Was Rob
hectic, but
Schwartz in New
fun.
York at that time at Cheyenne?
I don't think so. This was
He's still in
Jerry,
LA?
this was Jerry Graff time period
Okay.
as far as leading up the creative on that side, which was cool. I mean, just kind of getting to work and just sort of soak in some of his cool weirdness. I mean, I think like definitely one of my creative influences, even if I can barely scrape off of his shoe some of the creativity that he had. His oddness and weirdness and love of the peculiar insight definitely stuck with me. And I also think there I got a little more, Chiat is a place where the brief, I think it was just held to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Obviously planning and all of that kind of originated from them. And
In
I
the
think,
US, yeah, they were one of the first agencies that took it really seriously.
mhm. And it helped. I think that definitely sort of cemented my appreciation slash love-hate relationship with the brief, was like realizing like how good a brief can be, and also what it means when you have a culture of an agency that really respects it and respects the discipline that goes into it, and respects that the output of a great creative brief can be great creative work. And it's a lot harder to get to great creative work if you don't have that. So for me, that was a really cool learning experience.
You just sparked a thought in me that perhaps I haven't even articulated here. And how many episodes, Howard? Over 100?
This will be 110. We've done 100. We've wrapped
Yeah.
110 episodes.
But not only, I mean, we always talk about like the brief as kind of a roadmap to better work, but if you have a good brief and that good brief leads to good work, that strategist often is a key part of presenting and helping sell the work, right? Because
Mhm,
suddenly there was a strategy that makes sense. The
mhm,
creatives saw the strategy, were able to create something great from it. And so
mhm,
now we go to the client and we say, hey, this is what we took in all the information and this was what we thought it meant.
mhm.
And here's where we took it. And so I think that a good brief also helps you sell the work.
Yeah.
Because usually there's a good brief writer behind it who's somebody who can articulate ideas and help
Mhm,
explain to the client, okay, it's not just that we have a great idea, it's that this great idea had a journey that makes logical sense. A lot of clients, they need to follow the breadcrumbs, right? Like to say,
mhm,
like, you don't just go from, hey, here's a great idea. It's like, okay, so you told us this was the problem. We internalized and we think that the problem is really this. And
mhm,
here's your creative solution. And it's kind of
mhm.
like a weaving of a story there.
Yeah, I think that's really a good insight. I mean, those are the best meetings, right? Where one, you have the good brief, you have the good work, and you have that, that kind of being on the same page between strategy and creative, that not only just feels good, but that energy, I think, kind of comes through in the meeting when it's kind of like, yeah, like you can really feel that everybody's working off the
You
same
want them,
page.
you want them nodding their head until they see
Mhm.
the creative, and then you want their jaw dropping. Like that's, I
Exactly.
think, but you got to get them nodding their heads first.
Yes,
Exactly.
see here's the incongruity of this discussion and what sparks and keeps the conversation between Henry and me going,
Mhm,
because in the 110 episodes, the 2+ years that we've done this show, and I forget how many years we've known each other and
mhm,
been engaged in conversation long before we started the Brief Brothers, I've come to recognize and truly value how good a brief writer Henry is.
mhm.
And yet
Makes me
I
blush.
and I can see it coming through, in living color. And yet when I do training, and you sat through one of my workshops, so you know what I'm talking about,
Mhm.
I work with marketers for the most part.
Yeah.
When I get a creative like you sit in, it's wonderful because it adds a new dimension to the conversation. But marketers struggle when they write a brief.
Mhm.
And I stole a setup series of questions from, I think it was our first guest 2 years ago, Vivek Kuchibotla, who
Mhm.
is I don't know, he's a strategist,
He's
he's a trainer.
he's a former agency account
Yeah, and
director.
he does training now on his own. And
Mhm.
I stole this. I asked this question. I might have asked it when you joined me in my workshop. I asked creatives, I say, and the number of projects that you encounter in the course of a year, I don't know how many briefs you get. How many briefs would you say are truly inspiring? 1 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 7 out of 10. Well, most creatives in the workshops that I've done say fewer than 1 out of 10. And yet, when I talk with creatives of your caliber,
Mhm.
I think you would probably choose a higher number. Am I mistaken there? Would you say
A
that you've
higher
seen more than one? Yeah.
denominator, you mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Would you say that you, in the course of a given year, would you
Yeah.
say that you've seen 1 in 10, 3 in 10, or 7 in 10 briefs that you thought were really inspiring?
I think it's less than that.
Really? Less
Yeah.
than 1?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a different kind of incongruity. The incongruity I was talking about was the fact that marketers struggle to write great briefs, and creatives struggle with those marketers because they're not involved. They typically are not involved in collaborating with marketers,
Sure.
and they should be, because there's no Henry there.
Right.
Too many in-house ad agencies do not have strategists. So the people who are responsible for writing briefs are the marketers.
Marketing managers.
And that's where I say, you got to collaborate. Bring the creatives in, let them help you write the brief. And yet I still talk with creatives who are working with strategists, and you still say you see very few really, really good briefs. So it's ironic that you're working
But
with good strategists.
let's not now as a freelancer, when you were working in because you were worked at some top agencies.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
What was the percentage of, like, good briefs to bad briefs back then?
Yeah.
Because I think
at Chiat Day, you had to say that you saw more than 1 in 10 good briefs.
Yeah, I would say more there. I think, it's, there's the scale of what, good and then even great. I mean, I think, maybe it's the standard I set sometimes because I've had just enough of the great briefs that those are really rare. Like, those are less than 1 in a 10, pretty much almost everywhere, where it's that brief that just like has you like running to your desk. And you've already got 10 ideas sort of spinning because you're so inspired. I think good briefs, it really does kind of depend. Some places I think do respect that discipline a lot more. So some places it was probably more than 1 in 10 were good to the point where you thought, I got something I can chew on here. But some places it's less than that. I mean, and again, it comes back to a combination of places that maybe don't respect that discipline as much, but also today, the amount of projects we work on, I mean, it's nuts. I mean, whether I'm freelancing somewhere or when I've been full time, you used to get a project every few weeks, maybe. And then if you were working on a big TV thing, that was like the next like 5 months of your life. And like now with social and digital and experiential and all the different channels and the personalization, it's like you can get 5 briefs in a week. You know what I mean?
Well, I guess that leads to me another question. How many of those projects really require a brief? Because one of the pieces of advice I give is you got to draw the line somewhere, man. You can't not every project requires a brief. And Henry and I have actually devoted an episode.
It might be just a project start form with some basic information if it's a rudimentary thing that you're doing, as opposed to, we're going to pitch, it's a brand campaign for a pitch or something like that.
So how many of those 5 or 6 briefs that you get in a week would you say really required a brief?
Again, it probably depends on how you define a brief, right? Because I think, there is some kind of start form outline of what you really need from me. I do think there's a bit of information that needs to be different than the sort of master brief, right? So if you've got the umbrella brief for, I worked a lot in automotive, right? And so a lot of times you might be launching a car or
Which brand?
Oh my God, I've Mazda, Toyota, BMW. What else have I worked on over the years? I know there's others in there.
For California, you had to work in a car account, right?
Yeah.
Howard worked on Lexus, and I currently work on Ford. That's why.
I was also part of the team that launched the Honda Insight at Ruben Pasteur.
Oh, nice.
I worked on Jaguar for about 5 minutes, and I worked on Lincoln for maybe 10 minutes.
I worked on Lincoln too.
Yeah.
So I have Ford and Lincoln. So
car advertising is a weird beast, but I do think it's actually probably could be a really good case study for the broader industry, because you have all of the things are in auto advertising.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, most of it is shit.
Yeah.
And then every now and then you get something like what Crispin Porter and Bogusky did for the launch of Mini Cooper, which was incredible work.
Yeah.
And why they would ever go away from that, you know, is beyond me.
I don't know.
Let's Motor, it was brilliant.
It was-
They had the distinctive assets, the codes, the visual,
Mhm.
the tone of voice. That campaign had everything going for it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but Henry, someone's relative somewhere said, "Excuse me, but motor is not a
Motor.
verb."
What is that? Yeah,
To-
it's not a verb. And what
To
is
be
it?
fair, I believe that Crispin took on the bigger Volkswagen account, but if I were the client, I would insist that the next agency continue with the campaign,
Mhm.
give it new life, like the way
Yeah.
BMW kind of has over the decades with Ultimate Driving Machine. Like,
Yeah.
this is our brand, this is what we stand for.
I agree.
But that one to me is one that really stands out, like as an automotive, like, I don't know. I mean, they launched a brand from zero,
Yeah.
and it instantly, obviously the car was very recognizable, very different. So the product, it helps when the product is compelling, but it
Mhm.
wasn't a product without problems. I mean,
Right. A tiny car that
you know,
people that hated tiny cars.
I had one, and my mechanic says, you know, these are French engines in a German design car assembled in England. Like, it's the worst of all possible combinations.
Yeah.
A mechanic's dream.
I've had a couple of minis over the years. I will say I did love them, but
I
it
love
was
them too.
selling a ridiculously small car in a country that was just fully embracing the expeditions and the navigators of the world at the time.
And the Hummers.
Yeah, I mean that's why. I mean, almost every campaign I kick off for an automotive brand, inevitably we come back to Mini,
Yeah.
because you can look at that campaign and you know that there was a brief that just like embraced the soul of what that car and that brand could be. And yeah, that was a cool product, but I think like the beauty of recognizing what's true about a product or a brand and then embracing it, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be cool or kitschy. If it's Ford, if it's Mazda, if it's Mercedes, there's something ultimately true about it. And if you can find that and then pull that into a brief and then find ways to just give a dollop of that for all of the different social, digital executions, then you're going to have a really cool, consistent piece of work out there. But there's a discipline to that I don't know that we're always.
There's two lessons that I take from that, what we've just been talking about with regard to Mini. And the first is, you don't have to create a product for the masses. There's enough consumers out there that you can create a product that's a niche product and become wildly successful, right? So but Mini wasn't for everybody, but it was for people that didn't want what everybody else wanted.
Exactly.
And the second thing was the insight, and I wasn't there, I don't know what it was, but I drove a Mini for several years. I had a 2009, and I think I ended up selling it like in 2017. So I had it for like 8 or 9 years. I had it for a while, good long run with it. And the car drove like a go-kart, you know, and it's fun.
Yep.
And so they found a way to, you know, encapsulate that in a 2-word phrase, let's motor, and say, you know, this car is about, you know, running around like in a go-kart and having fun. And it was true to the product.
Yeah, I think to your point earlier too, like Let's Motor, that output, that campaign, that has the kind of legs that just do it or something, where like you could consistently come up with brilliant work against that. And I think, you know, I know this isn't specific to briefs, but it is specific to a really good insight and a really good insight that then is turned into this kind of, to your point, jaw-dropping level of creativity. I mean, you could walk into an agency at any time, and if they say, we have the Mini account, it's Let's Motor, every creative is going to be excited about that.
Yeah.
But the power that started with whatever insight those folks in that room came up with, as the strategists were working on this, and ultimately the creatives were coming together, like the power of that to potentially be the underpinnings of an incredible brand run for decades. I really think that could have and probably should have been the case for Mini, because I feel like if I look at their work now, that's not there.
No.
And I don't know that I understand who Mini is as a brand for the same reason, because they don't have that core anymore.
So when did you make the leap to the West Coast?
2012.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had done a little bit of a run in New York. After Chiat, I did Hill Holiday, then I went back to Chiat.
Hill Holiday is one of my alma maters too.
Yeah.
Ah,
Was
right.
Stavros Cosmopoulos still there, or had he left?
No, Jack Connors was the. When were you at Hill Holiday?
Like 07 through 09. I was in the New
Hmm.
York office, not the
I-
Boston
I
Not
office.
the
wasn't.
Boston office.
I
Yeah.
was. The Hill Holiday had a little media buying outpost in Fort Lauderdale.
Hmm,
They had launched AutoNation. When AutoNation first launched, it was a used car superstore like CarMax,
mhm,
and they were owned by Wayne Huizenga, famous South Florida guy who owned the Miami Dolphins.
mhm,
So they were the first agency of record for AutoNation. I don't think the relationship lasted very long, but they had an office here in Fort Lauderdale to service it, and
mhm,
they kept it because they had a bunch of like local, regional media radio buyers.
hmm,
And we came along. I had been at an agency that folded, but we were working on Dunkin' Donuts, the Hispanic, and so we approached Hill Holiday and said, do you guys want to have a Hispanic practice? Hire us 3 guys and you'll have one. And they
hmm.
said, sure. So
Oh,
we
cool.
moved into that Fort Lauderdale office, and then we moved it to Miami Beach. But I was there 2003 to 2007.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think it's funny. Hill Holiday is one of those places that um it flies a little under the radar. But like has done a lot of really cool stuff over the
So
years.
do you work for Mike Sheehan?
No, he might have been around at the time, but our New York office, kind of its own little world.
He was, yeah, okay. He was well, he became the CEO of the entire
Yeah.
agency.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, the
Yeah.
reason I mentioned Stavros Cosmopoulos, and I brought his name up a couple of times, I
Mhm.
took a workshop from him in 1992 when I was working in Chicago.
Okay.
And I don't know if he'd left Hill Holiday and he started another shop from there. And I pulled this out a lot. He had two little booklets that I've kept over the years. And I referred to this one in last week's blog post, make your layouts rough and your ideas fancy.
I
But
like
this
that.
was back in the day when we were doing, sketch layouts and
Mhm.
foam core. We didn't have computers,
Mhm.
So my essay last week was called Two Copywriters and One Art Director Give Advice to Creatives That Can Help Brief Writers Write Better Briefs.
Mhm.
And I quoted Cosmopoulos about this whole idea it's about an idea.
Mhm.
I quoted David Ogilvy, and then I quoted Luke Sullivan. And it was interesting. There was some pushback I had on when I posted it on LinkedIn that, this is the old school creative brief where Sir John Haggerty's first ad would produce an ad, not really all the things that we need for a creative brief, which, kind of made me roll my eyes a bit, because this gets back to what you were talking about before, TJ, and
Mhm.
Henry's mentioned this before as well, that we forget, in spite of the fact there are so many more channels, you still need an idea to drive the inspiring nature of what a brief does for creatives. You need to light a fire underneath the creatives in
Plus the
some way, shape,
stupid
or form.
obsession with saying the things that worked in the past don't work anymore because
Yeah.
somehow we're living in different times. Like, come on, the basics of the business have not changed.
No.
Right.
Basketball players still practice layups and free throws. Ballet dancers still practice at the bar, right? Golfers still spend hours on the putting green. It's basics, it's fundamentals. Those things don't change.
Fundamentals. There's, communication is communication since the cave drawing. And it's our industry just, I don't know whether it's probably insecurity, right? We always feel like we're a little bit of this outside force that doesn't get the respect that anyone else does. So we try to make these giant proclamations about things have changed and this is dead and
This
this
is going to revolutionize advertising and
it's the quest for scientificating. There's no such word for science, for turning this art into science, and it's got some science to it,
but
yes, but it's mostly
right?
an art. Yeah.
The second somebody starts telling me that the old ways don't work anymore, I know to instantly mute them and know that they're full of shit.
Yeah,
I know. It's such a shame because, like, honestly, even if you like dissected like some TikTok thing that was catching fire, you could pull out some very fundamentals of smart communication that came from some interesting insight. And that's exactly why people are resonating with it, because there's some thread of human truth that's pulling you through and that's drawing a million eyeballs to it. So
do you remember the Richard Dreyfuss movie where he played the music teacher? I can't think.
Oh, yeah. That was a good
Mr.
one.
Holland's Opus.
Mr.
Opus,
Holland's
yeah.
Opus. Do you remember he couldn't get the students in the class, in his music class, to be interested in classical music?
Yeah.
And then what he did, he just said, well, let's play. He played Jerry Lee Lewis's whatever,
Mhm.
as if it would been done like by Beethoven. So he
Right.
took the style of Beethoven and played a contemporary song. He
Mhm.
took all these contemporary rock and roll songs and played them in the style of Beethoven or Mozart or Chopin to show the connection
Yeah.
that all art has to one another. Everything is built upon something that came before it. And I
Yeah.
thought that's a beautiful analogy for what we seem to be blind to in our
Mhm.
industry.
Well,
Yeah.
Bill Bernbach said it, what drives a man, and he always used gendered language because he was talking in the early 1960s and late 1950s. But the motivations of what drives a man, these things don't change. They haven't changed in 10,000 years.
Right.
Human
So
nature.
if you understand human nature, and we're trying to, we're trying to manipulate human nature so they buy our product, or so
Mhm.
they vote the way we want them to vote, or so that they do some other action that we want them to do.
Yep.
Those motivations don't really change over time. But I like your analogy, Howard. I watched this YouTube channel, this guy named Rick Beato. He's like
Oh,
a
yeah.
music guy. He breaks
Great.
down songs. And it turns out that a lot of, not all, but a lot of popular songs have the chord structures come from like classical pieces from Mozart and things like that. And
Mhm.
somehow they tapped into something that makes you feel good. And artists over time have just copied and copied and copied
Well,
that because it's a
where do
sure
you
recipe
think-
for a hit.
Where do you
Mhm.
think John Williams got the theme from Jaws? Tchaikovsky or no, wait. Was it Prokofiev? No, the Rite of Spring. Who did the Rite of Spring?
I don't know.
You're asking
But
the wrong, you're
but I-
wrong guys.
If you listen to the Rite
Point
of Spring,
taken.
But I get it,
forgive
yeah.
me for not knowing the composer, but Rite of
Yeah.
Spring influenced John Williams to do
Of course.
dun 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 dun. If you go
Yeah.
listen to it, it's like that. He just got it from. Now I don't know if he actually did that or he would admit it, but that's the connection. It's like we
Of
don't.
course.
Which is why I say over and over and over again: amateurs plagiarize, professionals steal.
Mhm.
Right now, I don't tell that to my college composition students because I don't want them to steal.
But
No,
I-
they
I-
just consult Chat GPT.
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
except
good
there's a
point.
flaw.
Yeah.
There's a flaw. Just I will say this officially. You can have ChatGPT write your essay, but you'll never get the sources that they cite because they won't tell you. ChatGPT won't tell you. So
Oh,
you're on
really?
your own, buddy.
You
That's
know,
interesting.
You're on your own.
related to our topic of briefs and bringing, now that we're just kind of shooting the shit and Chat GPT, I've found it actually in the last couple of weeks. I've found it incredibly useful, not to write a brief, but like to interrogate it about things like it gives you back an answer for, like I asked it the other day. I'm working on a pet care account, and I asked it, I said, what are some of the cultural significance of cats in Latin America?
Hmm.
And it, in 10 seconds, it came back with 6 or 7 bullet points of the cultural significance of cats. And I'm not going to copy that word for word in my brief, but it helps me be more informed. And like, I thought that there was a culture. Now I have, and now I can go and explore further.
Okay, now Henry, just be mindful of 2 things. One, it won't tell you where it got the information, and second, it often tells you a lie, not intentionally. It just makes shit up. And it's been caught routinely. And I've been reading about this, been following it in the news. It makes shit up not because it has a deceitful
Right.
algorithm, but it just doesn't know any better.
It just doesn't know, and it has to create something. I think you go back, then you just go back to that politician's mantra, though. It's not a lie if you believe it.
Yeah.
Or
I mean, I think,
as Donald Trump said, it's hyperbolic truthfulness.
Yeah. Oh my.
so So I obviously I think it depends on the subject matter. Some subject
Yeah.
matter is more well documented than others. You're asking if you're asking it to go into like areas that are more of opinion, it's going to be tricky. But so far what I've found is that it's pretty reasonable. Like, but again, I'm careful about what I'm asking it, and
Yeah.
I'm also not gullible enough just to take something at face value.
Right.
But it's a tool, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's like, I think if we could just embrace the mindset that everything that comes out, they are new tools in the toolbox, whether it's tools that help us create, ChatGPT being one of them, and I'm sure there's others. And at some point, somebody probably thought Photoshop was cheating and blah blah blah. But the same thing with all the different media. They're different tools to help us reach
Googling. I
audiences.
mean, what's the difference between
Right.
Googling something and,
Right.
asking ChatGPT to basically Google it for you
Right.
and
People
Well,
spit
we
it?
used to do this 20 years ago. It was called Ask the Librarian.
Right. But people are actually substituting ChatGPT for Google now. They're like,
Yeah.
because they like
Right.
the level of information they get better. But I think as an industry, I just would love us to like, it's okay to embrace new technology. I don't think we need to worship it. And I think it needs to find its place. Like if we are primarily about insight and ideas, if we could just embrace and own that, and then go every time some new bit of technology comes out, how does this help us further that? How can this help us bring these insights and these ideas to the people who need to hear them? That's it. But we flip it and make it all about the technology as though those are the answers. And that's why we're all sitting here getting briefs for 2 banner ads that, like you said, maybe we don't even need a brief. We should have just had, maybe there's just an overarching brief. And then this just says execute against that brief, but keep in mind X, Y, and Z. But
Yeah, 400 pixels by 200 pixels.
yeah, like tell me the details and tell me like, maybe if there's a little bit of an audience insight.
Remember, we've got to have legal copy and we've got to have 14 bullet points. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Besides that,
have fun with it.
Yeah. So you migrated to the West Coast and you worked for some shops out on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And now you're in Phoenix. You've made Phoenix your home.
Yep.
And you've been active in your local Phoenix chapter of the American Advertising Federation.
Yes.
What got you involved in that? And let's talk about what your chapter does and why you think that's important.
Yeah. So I was actually involved in the same group back when I was in California in Orange County. So I had experience with it and got a lot out of it, both in terms of just getting a chance to get to know more people in the ad community, but also putting on some interesting programs and that kind of stuff. So when I came here, it was a little different experience. When I moved to California, I stepped right into a full-time job at an agency. And so I started to get to know people in the business that way. Here, I moved out here in the middle of the pandemic. I had a job based in California that had gone remote, and I kept working for them for the next 2 years or so, and I still even freelance with them. So I was not getting immersed in any kind of local community, and I thought, well, one, it's kind of fun to get to know some of the people, but two, if I want to, I'm sitting here in another ad market. It's not not as big as some others, but why would I not want to see if I could maybe do some work with some of these folks?
Networking, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, let's just see, and I happened to sign up for their email list, and they sent out a thing looking for new board members, and so I just showed up at a meeting and kind of got started, and as things evolved, it was really about, well, what do we do? Like, it's one thing to have this group, but what are the events that we do? What do we do to add value? And yeah, we can do things like happy hours and stuff, which are fun, particularly for the younger crew. They like that part. But we wanted to find ways to create some places for people to learn and kind of get a better perspective on the industry. Ultimately, that's the goal of this group, is to help sort of advance the cause of the advertising industry. So I kind of started putting my efforts into getting some guest speakers. That would be a really cool thing. Let's bring in some speakers about some relevant topics, things that people are always asking about, are always posting about online, are always wishing they had better resources for. And that got me thinking about you, Howard, because I had gone through your workshop for the creative briefs, and we've done a lot of chatting back and forth on LinkedIn and posting about challenges with briefs, opportunities, and all that. And so I reached out, to you, and I've got some other people that are lined up for later on in the year to just talk about different stuff. But luckily, you were available, and we're gonna get you in there the end of April. I think it's the
Yeah,
27th is the date,
I'm
and
looking forward to it.
you're gonna be able to. I think it's going to be really exciting because everybody, I think, is feeling overwhelmed by our business right now. It's moving so fast. So even people who are viscerally aware that we could do creative briefs better, there's just not the time to sort of dedicate in-house training or any of that kind of stuff to really give people an opportunity to learn about it. So that's where this is a really cool opportunity, where you can come in with all this knowledge you've got and give people a little sort of snack-sized intro to ways you might be able to write a better brief that people can then start to take back to their agencies, and maybe get a few of them excited to want to take part in your workshops too, and maybe just start to also become advocates for better briefs. I think
Yeah,
the people that do that, the better.
I was gonna say, I think like it's obviously a well-worn truism, is like the first step to fixing a problem is recognizing you have a
Mhm.
problem, right? So
Yeah,
getting people to kind of shake them and say, hey guys, you're overlooking this thing. It's not that hard to start on the road toward a better brief, right? You take a
mhm,
workshop, spend a few hours, contemplate, oh yeah, this document's really important. Next time I
mhm.
have to write one, I'm gonna spend a little more time, give it a little more care. And the time after that, I'm going to give it that one a little more time and a little more care. And over time, you learn to be really proud of what you're doing, writing creative briefs.
Mhm.
And we've shared often, I think part of the issue is, as a strategist at an agency, which is very different than what brief writers in other, on the client side or whatever,
Mhm.
you know, writing briefs is like one of the main things that I'm supposed to be responsible for, and therefore I give it a lot of importance, even though it's not something that I do every day.
Right.
Everything I'm kind of doing feeds into the writing of briefs eventually.
Yep.
Um, on the client side, and a lot of that it's just one thing that they have to do. That's it among the many hats they have to wear. They have to wear
Mhm.
this strategist hat for an hour before kicking off a project of writing
Yeah.
a brief and saying, hey, you know what, this deserves more than an hour. It deserves more than the tiny little piece of your brain that you're dedicating to it right now,
Mhm.
because can be, and not a guarantee, but it can be a key that unlocks a better work output from the whole team that depends on this document.
Yeah. And I think, all of that is true. And then I also think it ends up creating a better work environment, right? I mean, I think when there's a challenge with the briefs, you create yeah, you feed into some of that cross-departmental tension sometimes, which I don't think is really good for anybody to be operating under. If it's you're frustrated that you didn't get a good brief, and then as a strategist, you might be frustrated that you don't get the work back that you wanted to get, or and then it just kind of filters through the agency. So I actually think it can even have a broader cultural impact if you start to like create a discipline around, you know, we're holding ourselves to account to come up with really strong briefs. We're going to partner with the creative team to get to ones that they can really appreciate. And then creatives start to really value the work you do. And that inspires you to want to do better and better work, because and we're human. We're trying to ultimately please people around us and make people happy. And to that degree, when you feel like everybody's kind of like kicking in at their highest level, I think that's when you get the best output. So there's that whole level to it beyond, the very much like the sort of linear thing of a good brief leads to great work. So I think there's value that kind of spins on top of the good work side of it, that makes it more fun to work in that environment, because
Yeah,
the process is better.
one of the biggest surprises I discovered in doing my training, my workshops, was, and it was a slow realization,
Mhm.
that not all cultures welcome the change to respect the process and the brief equally.
Yeah, I could
And
imagine.
when I work with a company that says they want to improve their brief writing process, and it's because it's not just the brief itself, it's the process they build around the briefing, which
Sure.
is about getting the brief started, getting it written, going through drafts, and then doing the briefing itself. So it's a process.
Yeah.
When I work with some companies that say they want to improve their process, I can tell almost right away whether they mean it because of the way they push back. And it's almost like they rather than saying that we don't agree with you, they'd rather just shoot the messenger than listen to the message.
Mm.
So I get a lot of angst in the conversations that take place in the training. It just doesn't happen on my the workshops that you attended, which is just you and me and a small group of people. But when I'm
Yeah.
hired out to do it for my major employer, I find that there is a tangible resistance on some companies, not all of them. Most of them are really embracing it and really love it. But
Yeah.
that surprised me. That surprised me that they recognized that there was an importance to this document and this process. They wanted to make some changes. They felt that they needed to make some changes. But when I threw them into the deep end and challenged them on certain things, they weren't ready to hear the message.
Yeah.
That's
I
kind
mean,
of scary.
it is scary. I'm not shocked.
Yeah.
Probably going back more to the human nature thing more than anything. I think the sort of baked in resistance to change that we can have, even when we know change is ultimately needed. That even connects a little bit to like some of the work I do as a coach with people. Like some people might show up as a client and go, I need to change. But then it's like, well, here, you start talking about what needs to happen. And it's like, oh, well, not that.
Yeah.
I do think that's baked into our nature. And it's sometimes you just kind of have to get through 1 or 2 reps of
Yeah.
just trying it, where then you go, oh, I can see it. But
Well,
I
that's
think,
one of the reasons why I'm really looking forward to doing this talk, because I don't get a chance to have just an hour.
Mhm,
So I'm going to do some teaching,
yeah,
but this talk is going to be more about the why of the brief. Why do
yeah,
we do this rather than the nuts and bolts? I'll talk about some nuts and bolts in this talk, but when you only give me an hour, and that's fine. I mean, I'm not saying let's just take more, but saying now I have to change my focus. It's like, let's talk about why we do this. Why is this important? And I
mhm,
bring examples of other times in our history, in human history, when innovation was required in a very
mhm,
short period of time. I think the thing that guides me in this whole talk is the whole concept of liberating constraint, which was
mhm,
the topic of my essay today.
mhm.
That boxing you in, which is what a creative brief is designed to do, actually
Helps you.
promotes and inspires creativity rather than the
Yeah.
opposite. It's a little counterintuitive. Young
Mhm,
creatives resist that boxing in. Senior creatives say, no, I need it. Just give me some walls. Otherwise, I'm
absolutely.
going to flounder.
Yeah.
So when you talk about examples, what are some other examples out there where people were forced into a box and it exploded their imaginations? And I
Right.
bring a lot of those examples to this talk. So I'm really looking forward to the chance to talk at a higher level rather than saying,
Mhm.
let's do this group exercise,
I think that,
which is fun, but this is a different kind
yeah,
of a
I
different
think
kind of a
people are going to
situation.
really appreciate that. I do think if you asked 10 people, probably anywhere, like, what is the purpose of a creative brief? You get 10 kind of different answers. You might have a
Mm.
few consistencies of like it sets up the creative work, but like, I don't even know that everybody would agree that the creative team is the audience.
And that's the first clue I get that the company I'm working with is not ready to change because they think the marketers are the audience.
Right. And I think when you're at some agencies, marketers are the audience.
Mhm.
I think that's what becomes the challenge is, or they're at least enough of an audience that, you're sort of splitting your messaging because you're going, well, I need to give this for the client, but I need to give the creative something. And you end up with neither person really getting what they need rather than deliver a beautiful creative brief for the creative team and figure out what is the right way to communicate what you need to communicate to
Yeah.
your client.
The second clue is when they don't want to send creatives to the training.
Mm, yeah,
It's just marketers. I say, no, I need to have creatives there. It doesn't have to be a lot of creatives. Just send me 3 or 4 of your senior creatives because
Yeah.
we need their perspective. It's no. It's just, I just want marketers. Okay, well, this is not going to be as effective as if you have creatives in the room. So that's
Yeah.
second clue right there.
Yeah. And that's a shame too. I mean, I think, hard to know what drives that, but I will say, even just in my experience with your workshop, it was really, I think it was just me, and there was one woman who was a marketer. She was a marketing manager, maybe marketing director. And the learning that just comes from the 2 different perspectives being in the room together, is fascinating because, we're thinking through the lens of wanting to create great work. And yeah, I understand the big picture, but there's things that she would say where I'm like, oh yeah, like you're really you've got these different voices coming at you with different things. But so it's helpful for me to understand that, but ultimately it's helpful to understand there's lots of different ways to deal with those different voices and those different stakeholders that are in your organization. But this document needs to convey the problem that you have as a marketer. It needs to take that and distill it into some really interesting view of that problem that will then inspire creatives to put it out to the world in a way that everybody wants to solve your problem. And
are you hopeful, TJ, that the briefs are going to get better and the process is going to earn more respect?
I am. I'm a natural optimist, which, it's funny because I think we can be a bit
Dangerous.
of a cynical business at times, and I've got that
Yeah.
streak. You'll see some of my posts
The jaded creative. Yeah.
I get a little snarky, but my general view is, yes, I do have a belief that we can get better, but I also use this phrase active optimism, which is optimism doesn't just happen by like wishing for it. We have to do stuff. So whether it's you guys with your podcast, whether it's Howard with your workshops, I mean, it would be wonderful. I don't know if I want to invite competition for you, but a world would be a lot more wonderful if there were 20 of you and everybody was immersing themselves into some kind of program around getting trained around briefs, because there would be more than enough work to go around. That's what you really want. You want to see more and more and more people thinking about this. I mean, we do debate it on LinkedIn, and I think that's a start, but the recognition that it's not as simple as just saying, I want a better brief. There are certain things that you got to be willing to commit to, and you got to come into it with a little bit of humility and recognize I may not know everything about it. And you got to come into it with also just a general respect for the idea of ideas. And that's, I think, those are some of the biggest battles, but I'm hopeful. I think we can get there.
We've had a couple of guests, Henry, who we think were qualified to become a unofficial brief brother. I think TJ can join that small group.
Definitely.
I look forward to my hat.
Yeah, we should get some hats. Yeah, we'll have a little a shop on one of our websites where you can buy a Brief Brothers cap
with Howard and my mug on them.
There you go. I like it.
I don't think anybody wants a hat with my mug on it.
Let's do it. Get it like a
it's
cool
amazing
to create some cool little iconic thing. I think people will get into it.
Who knows? Who knows? TJ Bennett from Phoenix, thank you so much for joining us today on the Brief Brothers.
The Pudding Factory.
Conversation. The Pudding Factory. Yes.
Factory. Awesome. I appreciate it, guys. This was really fun.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
All right.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. And together, we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.
Bye.